Welcome to the Julie Rowe Show. Today is Tuesday, August 8th, and I am in northern Idaho at a beautiful place called Priest Lake. Been here with the Gibby family, recording for the documentary that's coming up based on the biography that Eric Smith has written called Gifted for a Purpose. It's a beautiful place to be. Hopefully you can hear the sounds of nature. We have a roadway not too far from here and some other construction going on, but wanted to record this podcast while we're in this beautiful, relatively pretty remote place out here in northern Idaho, where the sounds of nature are surrounding us, and we can focus today on what I feel is yet another important message. I'm going to turn the time over to Eric Smith for a few minutes to introduce our topic.
Sounds good. So it's been a couple episodes since we've done a topic on what you see in the future. And so we've pretty well covered the United States. And again, for those who haven't tuned into the What I See podcast episodes, those are where Julie shares what she sees in the future from sort of a geographic standpoint. We've gone through the United States from a high-level view. The plan is to eventually go back and revisit some areas that could use a little more detail lower to the ground. So anyway, we aren't quite to that point. We'd like to go across the world now from the United States, and today we thought it would be good to start with the borders of the United States. So we'll do Canada, Mexico, and we'll see where we go from there. So Julie, anything that comes to your mind that your listeners should know to be warned about those areas?
Thank you, Eric. It's difficult to know where to start because of so much of what I see, so I'm going to try to simplify it the best I can today. Similar to the United States, I see foreign troops coming into Canada. They'll come into Alaska, they'll come into British Columbia, they'll come over into Nova Scotia and Ontario, out of those coastal areas, as they come down from Canada into the United States. And part of that's an attempt to take over North America, but particularly the United States. And so they're going to try to cut off at the borders any and all coming to and from Canada and the American continent in general, going from the United States to Canada, or from Canada to the United States, or from the United States to Mexico. And so much of what you have heard me say happening in the United States, you can expect in Canada. And many who are familiar with Vancouver Island in British Columbia know that the Chinese have already bought up a lot of real estate out there. We touched on that briefly on a previous podcast with what I see in the northeast of the United States. I see that ferries and other forms of transportation via boat will become very hard to come by. There will be high commodities. I see tsunamis happening up the coast of the United States, and in some cases on the coasts of Alaska and parts of Canada.
How far-reaching is that tsunami? Does it come inland quite a ways?
I didn't write this down when I saw it the first time. With what I remember now, the tsunamis that come on the coast of the United States, which is mostly what I've been seeing compared to Canada, do come inland with extensive flooding and complicated by earthquakes that happen again and again on those coastal areas or shortly away from the coast. And then it affects sea life in great magnitudes, where we have power plants, especially nuclear facilities. We can expect to see things like Fukushima, similar to Fukushima. And I see those foreign troops coming, the sleeper cells that are in Canada coming alive, and the foreign troops that land in Alaska and British Columbia, coming southward as they invade the United States, trying to cut off the passes so that people in the United States can't get into Canada, into some more of those remote areas where they might be able to seek refuge. I do see Cardston, Alberta, Canada being a key location for a future City of Light, as well as other areas. I see a lot of people from Edmonton, Canada, coming down into the Cardston area and the surrounding areas outside of Cardston as they congregate in Cardston. In Nova Scotia and other parts of Canada going on the east coast, I see an influx of foreign troops, with those island areas having a lower water table and being closer to sea level. As one might expect, it is common sense as to some of what might happen on a destruction level with some of those villages and towns that are on the coastal waters. And that, of course, causes increase in the spread of plague and other illnesses because of malaria and other easily transmitted diseases when it comes to mosquitoes or other infestations through the mice and rat populations, and bacterias passed through ticks as well as other viruses. Similar to what we have going on in the United States, it can be expected that we'll have that all over the world, and particularly in Canada. In Mexico, I see the same, only being that it is a more poverty-stricken area, and the government being what it is. Both the leaders of Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, being an extremely wicked man. I see him participating in the dark arts. Those that are familiar with his background and were to study his background know he's tied directly into the puppet masters. I see him working to facilitate communications between the United States and Canada for the downthrow of the United States, as well as those in the Mexican government, being that they are corrupt with the Mexican cartel and the drug cartels. We already are inundated by the drug cartels. I see that increasing, and particularly the human trafficking scenarios that will increase as people are seeking safety and work and food and protection. I see those in both governments and in our own government taking advantage of many individuals and putting them in the drug trafficking and sex trafficking circuits. That's probably what breaks my heart the most, is the human trafficking that I see going on now and that I see increasing in the future as the Satanists and the Illuminists take hold and separate families, and they grab hold of women and children. And much of what I see for GTRF in the future is that as we help gather those in, we later will send our men out to do rescue missions to recover those who have been lost. I see in Mexico the tsunami that comes up through the Gulf, as well as near as we go into the Native American populations, both in the United States, Canada, and in Mexico or other parts of Central and South America. I see an increase in the Native American population with their missions coming to fruition, as it has been prophesied that they will have an important role to play in the last days prior to the second coming of Christ. I see those Native American populations gaining a stronghold, many of them bringing treasures of gold, silver, and other precious metals to help build New Jerusalem. I see, on a negative side, the foreign troops, the Chinese coming in through Mexico, in addition to other populations, in an effort to overthrow as immigrants come in who are criminally minded. And the borders are stormed by the local people of the Mexican, the country of Mexico. I was going to say the colonies, because there are Mormon colonies that were established long ago, and I see some uprisings in those colonies. I see significance in the Panama Canal, It has been and will continue to be a stronghold and a warring place for the Gadiantons, or what I refer to as Gadiantons, which is a term out of the Book of Mormon, referring to those who are conspiring men and women who seek to overthrow the righteous and seek to empower those who work for the dark side. I see the Panama Canal being a key location in the human trafficking as well as drugs, and also that area being cut off due to earthquake and tsunami. There will become a point where it'll be an impasse and travel will be limited. I see air travel stopping at some point on a commercial level, and only those with private airplanes or helicopters, or those with license to be able to fly the commercial airliners on a private mission will be able to continue for quite some time, making it travel difficult for those who have family and friends who are overseas or long distances away from the United States. I do see incredible technology coming about and increasing, including flying aircraft that make the aircraft that we have now look like we are centuries behind in time. In Central America, I see droves of individuals coming from the lowlands into the high mountain areas all over Central and South America. They too will gather in the mountain areas similar to what we have here in the United States, as their governments are being overthrown by coups and by operations that seek to overthrow any righteous government. I see Venezuela, Peru, Argentina, Mexico, Uruguay, Paraguay, Nicaragua, and Guatemala all conspiring against the United States in an uproar, including Cuba as well as several of the other countries that the United States has betrayed in years past. They will finally come together to try to cause more havoc for the United States as their own governments are overthrown, in part because the United States has tried to work with insurgent groups inside of their own countries for years to overthrow them and keep them destabilized so that the United States can be a warmongering, controlling, dominant force in the world. Eric, do you got anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I do. And I'm not a real political-minded person, so I don't know a lot about treaties and agreements and alliances. But I guess I'm thinking about North America, like United States of America, Canada, and Mexican governments, and how well they work together or how well they don't work together. I would think if Chinese and Russians and whoever else is coming to our shores, I'm wondering if that causes those three major nationalities to come together and work together, or
Yes.
or are they basically overtaken at that point and there's no opportunity to like form an alliance against this foreign invasion?
I first see China and Russia coming together to invade the United States, but they're conspiring with the Canadians and with the Mexicans, as well as the other governments in Central and South America. There is a unified force. The puppet masters within each of those governments are directing within each of those governments to gang up on the United States, so they are conspiring. They each have their own individual motives as far as why they're doing that. On a political standpoint, initially they will gain ground, I guess, in trying to overthrow the United States, but then they separate into factions and they end up warring one with another. So they fight for power. So similar to the stories that are in the scriptures in the Bible and the Book of Mormon, we'll see that come to fruition in the last days, with the wicked members of those governments working together to have a common goal of depopulation, control, dominion, money, laundering and human trafficking. And then because of their own wicked, prideful um, actions, cultures, personalities, and some of their narcissistic behaviors and things that go into their antisocial behavior, then they turn on each other and end up killing each other.
So I think you just answered it, but I'm going to ask this another way. There's this place in the Book of Mormon where we read about the fall of the government, and the they basically just form little local governments among
Mm-hmm.
their tribes and things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a time in the future when essentially government is non-existent or non-functioning, and people start kind of taking government into their own hands?
I do, and I don't think it's far off. That's where some people talk about the United States government declaring martial law. I see martial law coming to the United States, and within that, factions starting up where people, at first, some people put up with the martial law, and then other people decide that they're not going to put up with a tyrant who's trying to govern them, and so they will take the law into their own hands, especially because it becomes so dangerous in the United States and all over the world. So they have these little sects, as in sects, and then throughout the countries, also due to communications being poor and some groups having incredible communication skills and communication abilities with high-tech ability, and other groups being left destitute with nothing but maybe a walkie-talkie, a phone that doesn't work, or a ham radio. And I see the most successful communication for those who survive the tribulations being those that learn to take upon them the Spirit of the Lord and being able to communicate within light speed what they need to do to help protect and save. I do see those government factions splitting up. I see them trying to make alliances and warring one with another. And in some cases, we're talking about a family living on a compound. In other cases, we're talking about entire towns that try to gather together for protection, or people fighting for power. It's no different than what we've seen in the history of the earth. We're just seeing it on a greater magnitude and on a global scale. And we'll have, because we're interconnected the way we have been, when there's, a global EMP. I see an EMP in the United States on smaller scales, local areas, and then an EMP in the United States, and then going globally on many fronts for a lot of different countries. And when that happens, that will cause a lot of deaths. It'll cause a lot of injury, and it'll also shake things up so much that it'll instill a lot of fear in people. That's one of the many tactics that they have is cyber attacks and other things to try to control the population. I see that starting in the Pacific with China, North Korea, and the Philippines, and Mongolia, and some of those countries out in the Pacific, as they fight over territories and as they fight over the treaties that have not been kept, with Japan being included in that, China and Japan going to head, and the United States with the treaties that they've made with Japan being drawn into the war. But it's deeper than that, because the United States is known for not keeping their treaties, and so we've made a lot of enemies with what we've done in creating groups like ISIS and other factions to try to overthrow Syria and other countries. So it's all these puzzle pieces that are interworking and interlocking, and they're just waiting for the first dominoes to fall. When war starts in the Pacific, I see two large vessels. They actually look like they were made even in World War II time frame. They'll take those out to the middle of the ocean. They'll shoot missiles off of those that will throw out the grid and cause an EMP, and then they will sink the vessels in the ocean so that those who are trying to track or find what has caused that will not be able to locate them. They will use those soldiers, those Marines that are on those submarines and those boats, who they will have no idea that they're essentially being called upon for a suicide mission to destroy millions of lives.
I want to go back to the idea of migration. Do you see more people coming down from Canada, or more people moving north from the United States? And same with the U.S. and Mexican border. Is it an even mix of both directions, or
no? I see troops coming down from Canada into the United States, and I do see some people coming down into Montana and North and South Dakota, into Idaho and Wyoming, but I see a lot of Americans trying to flee into more remote places of Canada. It's happened during the Vietnam War, where people were trying to escape being drafted, and we'll see that again as the United States government tries to draft soldiers into the military.
And what about the U.S.-Mexican border? Is there a direction that's more predominant of movement?
Yes, I mostly see the South Americans and Central Americans coming into the United States, trying to take over. They're trying to take over as the infrastructure is still in existence, but they're looking for opportunities to come in and rape and pillage and take over land and things like that.
Okay, so in the grander scheme of things, again, what's triggering all this movement? Is it the arrival of foreign troops, or is it earthquakes?
It's natural disasters and the arrival of foreign troops. When we have a natural disaster, such as an earthquake that occurs on the San Andreas Fault, which I believe in many cases will be a man-made event. What people don't know is that with what we have going on with weather control and destruction, as well as what they're doing in the oceans and on the earth, they do know how to manipulate the weather, and they do know how to manipulate things like earthquakes, or do things like the fracking operations, and some things that are much darker than that will set off the United States. There is a group that actually wants and is planning for the San Andreas Fault, and they are purposely going to try to cause those earthquakes.
Interesting. Okay, this movement of people that we're talking about. So we've kind of discussed what triggers it. How long does this migration last? Is it years?
Several years. Yeah. Several years. When we go into the 13th month war, and then a 3.5 months, 3.5 years. So we have a 13th month and then 3.5 years within the 7 years of the tribulations. And even after the official 7 years of tribulations, I still see people warring and sparring one with another in communities, because there's still devastation, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to clean the earth up and to get it prepared for the second coming. So, as many people know, once New Jerusalem is established in Jackson County, Missouri, which is in the center of the United States, even known as the Heartland, and it truly is the heart of America and the heart of the Americas, as the promised land, once that New Jerusalem is established, many groups will come forward, and they will hear of a beautiful city of light in this place in the United States, and they will be gathered from across the oceans and within the lands and seas to be able to try to become part of Zion. And then those from Zion will go forth, and they will establish cities of light throughout the rest of the world. I've seen that part of my mission later is that I will live in Idaho, and within 3 to 4 years of the tribulation starting, I will go with a group of Native Americans near Guatemala to retrieve gold to help build a city of light in New Jerusalem. This is not something that I've spoken of previously. It's the first time I'm going public with that, but I do want it on record that there will be many groups working with the Native Americans who will come forward, who will help build cities of light, and that those Native American tribes, many of them know already that that's what their mission is. There are people, I see particularly working with the Cheyenne and the Hopi, as well as some of the other tribes. I see those tribes working together right now, already building with connections. I've recently made connections with a group out of Los Angeles, and with another group out of Oklahoma and one out of Arizona and Nevada in relation to my mission. And I see as we go forward with these Native Americans, increasingly so, we will see the Native American population where they were once kicked off their lands, the lands that have been given to them will become places of safety and refuge for millions of people. Those Native Americans will have an individual opportunity to forgive those, even being the white man that settled in the United States and took their lands away. And we will, as a people, culturally, as Caucasian, white individuals of European ancestry, have an opportunity to come to our brothers and our sisters who have Native American descent and ask them for a place of refuge. And I think the tables are going to be turned.
Oh, it's very interesting. Have you seen the beginnings of those relationships formed, or do you have yet to see how that's going to come together?
In my life, just in the last 3 years, I've made connections with those, and in the last 3 months, I've made connections with several of those groups. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've been in communications with 3 groups individually that are not connected with each other on the Native American front, and I was shown those in vision several years ago, so it's very surreal to me to be at this point, to be connected with those individuals. In fact, being tied to, and I'm not going to name who it is that is funding my documentary, but I will say that it is tied to the Native Americans, and it's a beautiful thing that they too see the vision of what needs to happen in America.
Are there others? I remember you told me not too long ago that you were told many years ago that you would come in contact with various groups of people. I remember that the Native Americans were one of those. Were there others?
I was promised that with my Greater Tomorrow Relief organization, and in reference to the work, which includes the documentary and the books going forth, that I would be working with Native Americans, with the Jewish population, with those of various faiths and denominations within the Christian sects, and with people of both interfaith and non-faith groups. And right now I have made connections with several of those groups.
That's great. What do you see moving forward here, Julie, in your mission? What are some of the next steps or signs or markers in the road that we should be watching for?
Well, most specifically, after we finish this podcast recording, I'm going to go do some more documentary recording. We're hoping to have the documentary out within 90 to 120 days. We have funding that has been offered by some investors. We're signing the final paperwork on that funding in the next week or two. We're waiting for the final contracts on that. Once we've already started recording. We started recording last month for the documentary. I anticipate we'll increasingly do that in the coming weeks, as Gibby Media is now representing us, not only for the documentary but for all of our recording purposes when it comes to the audio and visual. And so I see increased media exposure to get the word out and to send messages of light and hope to those who are seeking it. I see this message going worldwide and not only touching but saving millions of lives as we go into the tribulations. I see this message being one that will resonate with millions of people as they too have had revelation and come to an understanding that we are in a precarious situation, but that we are in end times that have been prophesied of for thousands of years. I see an increase in fortitude. I see an increase in ministrations from those on the other side, helping me particularly as I navigate this course, to help me get to safety long enough that I can get this work done before the enemy decides to take me down temporarily. And then when I'm able to come back from that, having had some additional training on the other side of the veil, I see that we will be having the 13th month war come into play. That's been talked about for generations. With that, the elders of Israel coming forth and gaining speed, gaining strength, especially from those on the other side of the veil as priesthood power comes, with translated beings coming to assist those that are here on the earth. We already have translated beings on the earth. We have resurrected beings on the earth, and I see an increase in those individuals coming forth in the next couple years in particular.
Great. Thanks for the update, Julie. I hope those listeners in Mexico and Canada and other places near the borders have found this beneficial. And thanks for those insights you've shared.
Thank you, Eric. It's a beautiful place to be here. I'm grateful for the Gibbies for allowing me to come, to do this recording, to work together, and I appreciate the opportunity that we have to be able to do these podcasts. We do have more coming, so stay tuned, folks. If you have good ideas that you want, go ahead and email me at agreatertomorrow2014@gmail.com. Can't promise we'll do a podcast on it, but we always appreciate your questions and your comments.
That's right. And just also, I've had a few emails come into Julie's email asking for mine. For those who want to reach out to me, you're welcome to. And my email address is media@geosmithmapping.com.
Thank you, Eric. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for being wonderful. Keep the faith. Stay focused on what matters most. And tune in next time. That's it for today.